right, Shalom. First and foremost, I want to give all praises, honor, and glory to Yahweh, Bahasham Yahushai, Bahasham Rakha Kodesh. Double honors to the elders and the apostles of Great Millstone, and peace and blessings to the elect. And today we're going to go into the book of Revelation, the 9th chapter. And in this chapter, it's a vision, a couple of visions or prophetic sights are revealed to the Apostle John. All right, and mainly the first half of Revelation 9 is dealing with World War One. Okay, and it's just he sees it and he describes it, but it's written in a way where it's in a dark saying. So most people, if they read it, they won't understand what it's talking about unless it's been broken down or explained to them. And then the latter half of it, jumps more to a scene that concerning the Third World War that is then showed to John. All right, so let's get into it. So this is Revelation chapter 9, verse 1. Now, at this point, you've had the, John has seen the book that was sealed, right? He saw the Lamb that was worthy to loose the seals thereof. And the Lamb loosed, right? Each seal one after another. And with the loosing of each seal, we saw the different events that transpired, different time periods, and things that would take place. And at the loosing of the seventh seal, you had the seven angels that were given seven trumpets to sound. So now we're on the sounding of the fifth angel, which is the commencing of World War One. All right. So this is Revelation chapter 9, verse 1. And the fifth angel sounded, and I saw a star fall from heaven onto the earth. And when you go into that word star, see here, it says a star, right? A star figuratively or literally. But when you look and you look at the other precepts that use this word, right? Back here in Revelation, back in the first chapter, where is it? Revelation 1 and 20, right? It says here the mystery of the seven stars. It's the same Greek word, G792. So the mystery of the seven stars which thou sawest in my right hand, and the seven golden candlesticks. The seven stars are the angels of the seven churches, and the seven candlesticks which thou sawest are the seven churches. So here a star can be likened unto an angel. Now, Yahushua was referring to because the word angel means a messenger, right? And instinctively, people, when they hear angel, think of the holy angels in the heavens, but they are one kind of messengers. You can also have angels on earth, which are in the form of men, okay, as messengers or one people appointed to a certain role, right? You can deliver a message either by word or by deed, right? That the Lord wants you to bring. Sometimes the Lord uses somebody to do something in order to deliver a message or to get a message across. So going back to Revelation 9, the star can be likened also unto an angel, which can be physical or in the carnal sense, as an individual on earth or a man on earth, or as an angel in heaven. Now, in the sense of a natural holy angel, this would have been one, as it says, that fell from heaven. The word fall does not mean to actually fall, but to descend onto the earth, and to him was given the key of the bottomless pit. The key is a control, right? Somebody who has the keys has control. They can open, right, the doors, they can close it. And the bottomless pit is the region of Europe. Okay, so spiritually, you have whatever takes place on the earth is controlled through the spirit. You have angels that work on the minds of different rulers and different kings in different regions to bring different events to come to pass. Okay, so in the spirit, you had an angel whose job it was to control the events over there in Europe to bring to pass this prophecy here. But they would use the means of, actual men, okay, which are also likened unto angels in the carnal sense that are playing out these things, right? Like when you go and read about World War One, and you read about, the matter of fact, let me pull it up here. World War One, you'll see the cause of it, right? And what ended up triggering that war. This was done by the actions of men, but through the control, right, of the Heavenly Father via his angels. Okay, so you have angels in the physical sense, right, that are taking these actions, and you have angels in the spiritual sense that are controlling, people to go ahead and do what it is that they end up doing, right, in order to fulfill prophecy. Now, it says here World War One, or the First World War, from July 28th, 1914. Here they dated to November 1918, but we'll get into that when we look at the aftermath, because it officially ended a bit later than that. Anyway, it says also known as the Great War, was a global conflict between two coalitions, the Allies and the Central Powers. Major areas of conflict included Europe and the Middle East, as well as parts of Africa and the Asia Pacific. And the vision that you see, or the vision that John received, was focused mainly in Europe, all right, which is the bottomless pit. The war saw important developments in weaponry, including tanks, aircraft, artillery, machine guns, and chemical weapons. One of the deadliest conflicts in history, it resulted in an estimated 30 million military casualties and 8 million civilian deaths from war-related causes and genocide. The movement of large numbers of people was a major factor in the deadly Spanish flu pandemic. So now it goes here more into the events that triggered the war. So it says the causes of World War One included the rise of the German Empire and the decline of the Ottoman Empire, which disturbed the long-standing balance of power in Europe. The exacerbation of imperial rivalries and an arms race between the great powers. Growing tensions in the Balkans reached a breaking point on 28 June 1914 when Gavrilo Princip, a Bosnian Serb, assassinated Franz Ferdinand, the heir to the Austro-Hungarian throne. And so this assassination of Franz Ferdinand was like the powder keg, okay, that sort of blew over into what you have here. So it says Austria-Hungary blamed Serbia and declared war on July 28th. After Russia mobilized in Serbia's defense, Germany declared war on Russia and France, who had an alliance. The United Kingdom entered the war after Germany invaded Belgium, and the Ottoman Empire joined the Central Powers in November. Germany's strategy in 1914 was to quickly defeat France before transferring its forces to the east. But its advance was halted in September, and by the end of the year, the Western Front consisted of a near continuous line of trenches from the English Channel to Switzerland. The Eastern Front was more dynamic, but neither side gained a decisive advantage, despite costly offenses. Italy, Bulgaria, Romania, Greece, and others entered the war from 1915 onward. So just a bit of background there. You can read a lot more about it. But in any case, coming back to Revelation 9, it mentions here, and to him was given key or control of the bottomless pit. Now, when you read, in the scriptures, let's actually cross-reference here, or look at the word bottomless pit in the different scriptures where it comes up. I believe it's bottomless. So you see it comes up here in it's the same Greek word used for the deep, but also Revelation 9 and 1, we're reading about that, and Revelation 11, right? It says here, and when they had finished their testimony, the beast that ascendeth out of the bottomless pit shall make war against them, and shall overcome them and kill them, right? Keep that in mind. Revelation 17 and 8, and the beast that thou sawest was and is not, and shall ascend out of the bottomless pit. So we know and understand the beast. All right, today it's a composition of different countries into a world power, right? Which is the system, or the beast system we know as NATO, right, and the European Union, that is headed, you could say, by America. But when you go back to the rising of the first beast, that was the Roman Empire, right? The ancient pagan Roman Empire. Now it says that it ascendeth out of the bottomless pit, right? So it came up into power. It rose out of the bottomless pit. So where did Rome, or the Roman Empire, come from? Where did it arise? It wasn't from some portal, right, in the depths of hell. It was from Europe. Okay, so that's an indicator as to where the bottomless pit is, because that's the same region where the beast ascended from, right? The first beast ascended from, which is Europe. Okay, so continuing in verse 2, it says here, and he opened the bottomless pit, and there arose a smoke out of the pit, and the pit also represents land. Okay, that's in Second Esdras. Is it Second Esdras 5? Yeah, Second Esdras 5 and 24. I'll just hit the point. It says, of all the lands and of all the lands of the whole world, thou hast chosen thee one pit, and of all the flowers thereof one lily. So if if here you have, it says of all the flowers one lily, which is a type of flower, then when it says of all the lands one pit, what would that pit be? It's not talking about some hole. It's talking about a land that's just called here or referred to as a pit. Let's actually take a look. Let me see what they have here in the Greek for pit. They might have it, they might not. Let's see if they go off or if they're on point. Yeah, so they have it here more in the sense of like an actual hole in the ground. But that pit is symbolic or really representing a piece or region of land. So it says here, and he opened the bottomless pit, and there arose a smoke out of the pit, as the smoke of a great furnace. And this smoke was due to the war, right? This was the commencing of World War I, right? So from the actual battle of the war, that's what this smoke that John was seeing symbolized. Because just like when there's a war, you have bombs, explosions, and that creates smoke, right? It says here, so it looked like smoke of a great furnace, and the sun and the air were darkened by reason of the smoke of the pit. Let me see if I type in here World War I. Look at the images here. You can already see it. Right, I saw it in one of the pictures, but let's see. World War I, battle field. All right, you can see it now because this is black and white. The smoke comes out looking white, but you can already see, right? You got the smoke. You can see that, right? These are just small examples of it, but when you look at a battlefield, you're looking from up, looking down, right? This is all you see, smoke, and it's darkening the skies because of all the explosions and so on. So that's the scene of war. It says, and the sun and the air were darkened by reason of the smoke of the pit, right? So the war that was going on in that region. Verse 3, and there came out of the smoke locusts upon the earth, and unto them was given power. Now these locusts are not talking about actual animals like this. This right here is what a locust looks like, right? They look like grasshoppers. Locusts swarm, and they fly around like that. This isn't talking about what John saw. Is not an actual locust. What he saw were the planes, right? The fighter planes that they used in the war. Those were the locusts that he saw upon the earth. And the reason he called them locusts is because that's what they look like to him, right? He's seeing, if in John's time there were no airplanes, right? There weren't any airplanes, and when you actually look here at the way these locusts fly, and you look at their wings and how they fly and are in a swarm and in formation, that's the first thing that came to his mind when he saw the let's type in World War I fighter planes. When he saw these flying through the sky, the first thing, and look at them, some of them are even green. So the first thing that came to his mind is these look like locusts, right? Like really, really huge locusts, but they look like locusts. So it says here, and they came out of the smoke locusts upon the earth, and unto them was given power, as the scorpions of the earth have power. So what is the power of a scorpion? The scorpion, using its tail, which is deadly, can kill you or it can wound you. And likewise, these locusts had that ability, right? Or these fighter planes had that ability. And why did it liken their power onto scorpions? This is going into the ability to wound or to kill. And it wasn't that they would just run the plane into you, but they would be shooting, right? If you let me see if I can find that on here. World War I, I think it's a rear gun, or what do they call that? There's another name for it, but in any case, it says here World War I rear guns or defensive machine gun for aircraft were primarily air-cooled Lewis guns with top-mounted pans. Okay, that's good. Mounted on flexible ring mounts, these allowed observers to protect the rear of aircraft. Okay, so let's take a look here. So you can see this was mounted so that from the back, from the rear of the plane, or the plane, they could shoot. They'll be shooting down. This guy, he's behind, okay, and the guy over here is directing the plane. That's the cockpit, you would say, and they're shooting from the tail, as it would seem. So John saw that, and that's why he said that these have power, and he likened them on scorpions because the power is coming from the rear end, their tail. Verse 4, and it was commanded them that they should not hurt the grass of the earth, neither any green thing, neither any tree. Now, locusts, actual locusts, that's exactly what they hurt. The grass, the green things, that's what they do. They eat your crops, they eat your, your plants, your trees, they devour all of it. So this goes to show you that this isn't talking about actual, locusts, but only those men which have not the seal of God in their foreheads. So in the war, their target wasn't the land, their target were the people. So you would see if these planes, these fighter planes were flying, they wouldn't just start randomly shooting at the ground. They would fly over specifically to the regions where you had people, right? Those on the opposing side, and that's where they would start shooting and then attacking. Okay, so their goal was not to just go around destroying the land and trees, but it was to target, as it says, only those men which have not the seal of God in their foreheads. And what this means is, because during World War I, you had individuals in there that were fighting in the war, just like you have in different time periods, which were Israelites. Okay, but these men that were in the war, the ones that had the seal of God, were ones that were exempt. Okay, because either them or through them, you would have the seed line of the elect, right? You would have men that would later on be born on the earth, who would come through the lineage of these men that had the seal of God. So they had to be preserved to bring forth the seed of the Lord's elect, or his prophets, or his chosen, you could say. And it's like Yahushua, for example. Yahushua's line, right, which goes back through the line of David, that was preserved from the time of David all the way to the time of Yahushua, right? When you go into it, when you deal even through the Babylonian captivity, through the Greek captivity, right, up until the time of the Romans, that lineage was kept, it was preserved. When you go and you read about Jeconiah, who was from that line, and Jehoiakim and all, these men were not, let's say the best followers of the Lord, but yet the Lord still preserved them because that line, Jeconiah was thrown into prison in Babylon, but the Lord put the spirit on, what's his name, Amel Marduk, which was a Babylonian king, to remove him from prison and treat him well, to preserve him, right, and his descendants, his children, because that line had to be protected for Yahushua to come through that line. So likewise, in this time, even though you had men in the war, right, who are either of the elect, right, or would bear the seed of the elect, they were ones that would make it out, that would be preserved. So that's why it says here, these locusts, right, or these fighter planes, really they targeted those men that did not have the seal of God in their foreheads. So those were fair game. Verse 5, and to them it was given that they should not kill them, but that they should be tormented 5 months. Now this killing is not literal, right? It doesn't mean that they weren't literally, they shouldn't kill them, because people died in the war, right? There were casualties in the war. And let's take a look at this word kill. It says to destroy, to allow to perish, metaphor to extinguish, abolish, right? So what this means was even though you had people dying in the war, one side didn't completely, abolish the other side, like just instantaneously, right? This war had to, continue on for the span of this 5 months, which represents 5 years. So that they should not kill them doesn't mean that people didn't actually die, in this war, but that the war would keep on going, right? It wouldn't end. It would continue until the duration of that time period of like 5 months, or which is symbolic for 5 years, should be up, because that's how long the Lord um, set up this war to last. Now the fighting stopped, just short of 5 years, but the official ending of the war, came within that fifth year, or that 5 year mark. It says that they should be tormented 5 months, and that torment is by way of the war, right? The suffering, because when you're actually, especially back then with war like that, it wasn't comfortable at all, at all. All right, it was loud. You're in the trenches. It's cold. You're hungry. There's diseases. You're afraid for your life. You may be injured, right? These were, being in that war was like hellish, and they had to, endure that for the duration of that war. Now it says 5 months. If we look up here, World War One, going back to what we read before, going to the aftermath, it says here. Now, when you look at what we read up in the beginning about the war, let's go up to the top. It said that this was from July 1914 to November 1918, right? Which is about 4 years, a little over 4 years. Really, it's into the fifth year. But when you go to the actual formal end of the war, it says a formal state of war between the two sides persisted for another 7 months, until the signing of the Treaty of Versailles with Germany on June 28th, 1919. Okay, so that would go from 1914 to 1919, which is 5 years. The U.S. Senate did not ratify the treaty despite public support for it, and did not formally end its involvement in the war until the Knox-Porter Resolution was signed on July 2nd, 1921 by President Warren G. Harding. For the British Empire, the state of war ceased under the provisions of the termination of the present war Act in 1918. It says some war memorials date the end of the war as being when the Versailles Treaty was signed in 1919, which is a time period that is referenced by Revelation 19. That's why it says 5 months, which is 5 years, which was when many of the troops serving abroad finally returned home. By contrast, most commemorations of the war concentrate on the armistice of November 11th, 1918. So going back to Revelation 9, verse 5, and their torment was as the torment of a scorpion when he striketh a man. That's the torment or the pain or the wounds or destruction dished out from those fighter planes, right? Because what were they shooting? Bullets, right? Now, when a scorpion strikes a man, it stings, right? It stings you, and you either are wounded, and if you don't get help soon enough, you're gonna die. Likewise, if you were on the battlefield and you were shot, by the tail gun, of one of these fighter planes, depending on where you were shot and how quickly you can get help, if you could get help, you would either survive or you would die, but you would suffer loss, right? You would be in pain. So it was the torment of these planes, right, that were attacking them, and really the war. Here he described it as like that of a scorpion when it stings a man. Verse 6, and in those days shall men seek death and shall not find it, and shall desire to die, and death shall flee from them. Now I wonder if there's any mention of the conditions here during the actual war. Probably not. Soldiers' experiences. There you go. Let's see if they have anything in here. But what that means here about them desiring, seeking death and not finding it, is due to the hellish conditions of the war. You had some people that were traumatized. They were shell shocked. They lived a life worse. It felt worse to be alive afterwards than to die. Some of them had certain injuries and you may need to get your legs sawed off. And back then, they're not, this ain't, oh, I'll put them under anesthesia, knock them out, and then you just wake up, the operation is done. Oh, nice, look, okay, you get a nice prosthetic on there. No, back then you had to go through the shit. At best they might give you some alcohol, some strong drink, and they might put a what's that thing called, a rag in your mouth, tell you bite on this, while somebody walking in there with a giant saw about to cut off that leg, and you experiencing all that pain, and you just like, nah, just let me die, I don't want to go through this. So there were many casualties, and hellish conditions that they suffered in the war and because of the war, so bad that men, some just desired to die, right, and shall not find it, because some of them wanted to die, but they wouldn't be able to. They wouldn't let them, and they'd have to just endure through whatever it is, that they were suffering, whether it's the hardships of the trenches or the post-traumatic stress that they would have, as a result of the war, or the harsh, and let's say not as painless treatments that they would endure, just to save their life, for those that were dragged off the battlefield. It says, and death shall flee from them. That's why it likened this time to torment. Verse 7. Oh, actually, I said I wanted to see if they had any okay, so this doesn't really describe some of, I thought they would have it in here, but it doesn't really describe like the actual hell that the soldiers were going through on there. But if you can look it up, right, you'll see how bad it was. You can see even clips about it if you want a visual. Verse 7. And the shapes of the locusts were like unto horses prepared into battle, meaning they were in formation. And on their heads were, as it were, crowns like gold, and their faces were as the faces of men. So what John was seeing, right, remember, he's looking at these scenes, right? He's seeing the war, he's seeing the plains, he's seeing the people, right? The Lord is showing him all this. And so as it says here, he's seeing on their heads, as it were, crowns like gold, right, which is going into the helmets that they wore. Both the pilots of the plane, and also the those that were in the war, right? Like because in the war you have different ranks, and those that were of the higher ranks, right? When he would get those, as he's watching the vision, and the Lord will show him those of the higher ranks, there were certain helmets that they wore at the time that were actually gold or golden, and you can look that up in World War I. And also at the same time, dealing with the actual planes themselves, you had some of them where the front part of the plane, this little part right here, because you had different colors, but some of them were yellow, right, which would look, give that golden look, the light, the sun, the light reflecting off of it, it would shine, and it almost looked like there was a crown on the front of the actual plane itself. Okay, and as he says here, and their faces were as the faces of men. Locusts, don't have the faces of men. Yeah, they got eyes, but they don't have the faces of men. What he saw here was this guy. Okay, he saw this guy right here. Not specifically this guy, but the pilot. So when you see the planes are being flown like that, like this guy right here, right? You'll see the plane going on, flying, and then you'll see the head or the face of the pilot, which is why he said they had faces of men, not because the actual, these were actual real locusts, and then they had a head of a man. It says here, and they had hair as the hair of women. And so what he saw there with the in terms of those that were actually flying, or piloting these planes, as he's seeing them flying, when you see the kind of headgear that they wore, a lot of them wore these, right? You have the goggles, and you have this little, head, / head covering part, and some of these would have, you've seen them, the little flaps, right, on the sides of it that look like long ass ears, and as the wind is blowing, you'll see those flapping along with their scarf, right? And for those that were actually piloting these planes, John saw it looking like hair, You know, like they had long hair that was actually flowing. And when he would see visuals of, you know, from the non-pilots of, you know, let's say their armies or their generals and so on, at this time you had from the side of Prussia or Prussia, however you want to pronounce that, there were these kinds of helmets that they wore. See if I can find it. I don't want to lose this. So let's look up Prussian. What was this called? Helmet with plum. And that the plum is this little portion that looks like actual hair, like a portion of a wig. And you can see the gold parts of their helmets here, right? So John was being showed scenes from, you know, the pilots flying the planes and the planes themselves flying, but he also saw, you know, the actual, you know, men, right, the generals and the so on. Because if he's seen a scene of World War I, he's gonna see the commencing of it, right? He's gonna see the commanders, the generals, those that are giving or issuing commands, those that are, you know, given the go ahead to send out the different fleets, those that are actually getting into the fighter planes, those that are then flying it and piloting it. So he's seen all of these. And so this is what that looks like. All right, for those that weren't actually in the planes, that were more like these, because these are more higher ranking officials, right, in the army, and they would walk around with this. Um, Today, a modern day, somewhat example, right, which is slightly different from this, is what what do they call those? The guard of the royal guards, what they wear on their heads. Let me see, United Kingdom Royal Guard. Yeah, you see them walking around with this thing on. It's not their actual hair. Look at that. Even they got this. You know. Now, for whatever reason they do it, well, that's that. But today, this is like what they wear on their heads, right? Back then, they had the helmets with the plum, which I believe signified like rank of some sorts. But so John is seeing like those that are on the land, you know, having these things. It looks like it has the hair of women, but also those that were actually piloting the planes. He's seeing like the, you know, the scarf blowing in the wind, the little. I want to see if I can find a good image of it. World War I pilot. It's not a helmet. It's like a hat. Let me see. Pilots in plane. Yeah, it's this thing that they were wearing, you know, and they would they would clip it under their chin, but for the when they didn't do that, you would see it flapping. I'll see if I can find one. If not, you know, it's not that big of a deal. I'm sure most of you know what I'm referring to anyway. Yeah. Anyway, that's wait, hold up. Yeah. This part. There you go. This part right here. So some of them would keep this on, like, you know, tie it down. Some wouldn't. Now imagine what this looks like as you're flying with the wind blowing contrary to your face, and this is flapping behind you, right? To somebody looking at this from afar, or, you know, like John in his time, not knowing what these were, it looks like hair flowing, you know, in the wind to him. Anyway, going back to Revelation chapter 9, um, verse 8, it says here, and they had hair as the hair of women, and their teeth were as the teeth of lions. And the teeth here were the bullets that were coming from the planes. Okay, and they, as it's going to tell you, they wounded, you know, with those teeth. That was their attack power. In verse 9, and they had breastplates, as it were breastplates of iron, and the sound of their wings was as the sound of chariots of many horses running to battle. And the breastplates is describing the the armor of the planes, okay, like the material that it was made of. And the sound of their wings, which is the propellers, was like the sound of many chariots. It was very loud, you know, because back then, today planes are more quiet. You know, you have stealth planes, you know, and so on. Back then, it wasn't. They didn't have advanced technology to make these planes as quiet. Just like back then when they first invented cars, cars were very loud. Like a tractor. But now you have like the muffler system and so on that can have these cars. You have some cars that drive and you don't even hear a sound. But back then they didn't have it like that. So you hear that, just fly very, very, very loud. Verse 10, and they had tails like unto scorpions, referring to the tail gun. And there were stings in their tails, which were the bullets that were being shot off. And their power was to hurt men 5 months. This was the duration of the war. And the hurt was coming from the casualties, right? The killing and the wounding of the soldiers. And they had a king over them, which is the angel of the bottomless pit. So this king that was over them was, once again, focusing in the region of Europe, was Kaiser Wilhelm II. I'll type his name in here. You'll see, what role he played in World War I. But the Lord appointed him in there to play a role, right, as his position that he had in there, and also furthering or starting this war. Whose name in the Hebrew tongue is Abaddon, which in the Hebrews, I think it's Abadwan. Let's take a look at that. Yeah, let's go to the Hebrew. Yeah, Abad 1, which means place of destruction, ruin. Let's take a look. Let's look at this guy, Kaiser Wilhelm II. What can you tell us about him? So it says Kaiser Wilhelm was the last German emperor and king of Prussia or Prussia from 1888 until his abdication in 1918. Let's see, role in World War I. So it says here, Kaiser Wilhelm II was the last German emperor and king of Prussia, played a central role in World War I by fostering a reckless foreign policy and enabling the outbreak of war. He encouraged Austria-Hungary's aggressive stance against Serbia, and we read about that in the information we read before here on World War I. Then transitioned into a symbolic figurehead as military commanders Hindenburg and Ludendorff took control. So his main job was this part, right? Through his policy and this aggressive stance that triggered and furthered that outbreak of the war. And then the rest, his commanders took over to handle the actual war itself. So he had a role to play, and that's why he was put there, right, as the messenger in the bottomless pit, or the one the Lord set up to commence or to trigger, by their reaction to what we read about the assassination, right, by the Bosnian Serb. Yeah, this guy, this Gavrilo Princip, who assassinated Franz Ferdinand, and what was the response? They basically did not take that. They didn't take too kindly to that. So this is going back to Revelation chapter 9, verse 12. One woe is past, and behold, there come 2 woes more hereafter. And these woes, which are destruction, were signifying the 3 world wars that would take place. So after seeing World War I, right, as he said here, 1 woe is past, which is World War I. And after World War I would come 2 more hereafter. And guess what? In our present time today, we're now living through the beginning of the Third World War. Verse 13, now from verse 13 down to the end, what John sees is a vision of the Third World War. Okay, it jumps, what he sees, he jumps from the first to the third. And sometimes it's like that, right? When you read even in Revelation 20 and in Revelation, the 12th chapter, as you're reading through this vision, the time period, sometimes the Lord will do that. He'll show you a time period, a vision of a certain time, and then it will jump. So you got to have the spirit of discernment to be able to decipher, when it's talking about, what. or else you're going to be confused when you try. If you try to read everything, you think that everything is going to be in chronological order. You're going to get confused. This is Revelation 9:13. And the sixth angel sounded, and I heard a voice from the four horns of the golden altar which is before God, saying to the sixth angel which had the trumpet, loose the four angels which are bound in the great river Euphrates. Now, these angels that are, quote, bound, it doesn't mean they're like bound, like shackled up over there. All right, but they have a duty, they have a responsibility, to orchestrate, right, or trigger certain events in there leading to that Third World War, making sure that everything is set, working on the minds of different kings, on the physical environment, and also the way tensions build up and play out to lead or trigger that war. And the four angels were loosed, right? So they were given the go ahead, which were prepared for an hour and a day and a month, and a year. That's a specific time for to slay the third part of men. Now, the third part of men is representing the Edomites. Okay, you have three classifications of men: the Israelites, which are the sons of God; the sons of the wicked, which are the Edomites; and the sons of men, which are the other nations. So, through the orchestration of World War III, that's how they would slay the third part of men. Now, the reason, as we're going to read on down, it keeps mentioning the third part or the third part of men, is you got to keep in mind, yes, in this war, there are going to be casualties on all sides. It's not going to be just the Edomites, but the ones that are going to be most affected are the third part of men. It's on the side of Esau. And we'll expound a little bit on that as we keep on reading. And the number of the army of the horsemen were 200,000. That's 200 million. And I heard the number of them. Okay, and basically, this was all the the artillery, right, that the nations have, for this war, this Third World War. That's including their missiles, right, the warheads. Now, 200 million is a lot, right? It sounds like a lot because it is a lot, but keep in mind that when nations go into, war mode, they go into mass production, right? And they'll be able to unveil, different sorts of weaponry, ways to, optimize and build more, right? Mass production. Okay, so right now, you may look at it and say, well, damn, there might not even be enough resources to develop this many missiles, right, or weapons for war. But they have more than just nuclear missiles, right? They have different kinds of other missiles, that can do a lot. That some of them we don't even know, and some we'll see when the war actually commences. Okay, but all in all, the total of their combined military force, right, including their missiles and their drones and all the different tools that they're going to use in this war, is that 200,000. Okay, it says here, and thus I saw the horses in the vision, and them that sat on them, having breastplates of fire. Now here he sees in in verse 17, the description, what John saw were these missiles. He describes it here as the horses, but these are representing the missiles, right? And it says here, I saw the horses in the vision, and on them and them that sat on them. The horses and those that sat on them are both referring to the missiles. No, you're not gonna see no human being or creature is gonna actually be sitting on top of a missile, but this is the structure of the missiles. Some missiles are designed to where you have the main shape, but then you have what looks like a fin, right? Or you have what looks like some other pieces that are sticking out from it that may look like something is mounted or placed on the missile itself. It says having breastplates of fire and of jacinth and brimstone, and the heads of the horses were as the heads of lions. These horses being the missiles. Now, this isn't talking about an actual literal creature, right? There's no horse that has a lion's head that then breathes fire. This is a dark saying, right? Or it's a metaphorical speak referring to the missiles. The heads is referring to the nuclear warheads, right? Which these missiles, you have missiles that have nuclear warheads, and you have some that have warheads, but they're not nuclear. Okay, these are all part of the weapons of these nations. So it says here, And the heads of the horses were as the heads of lions, and out of their mouths issued fire and smoke and brimstone. And that's the warheads, because you have a missile that, if it's, for example, an ICBM, an intercontinental ballistic missile, it's pretty huge, but it breaks up, right? The bottom part, is first propelled with that fire, that heat, and then as it travels, the latter part of it breaks off, and then the next part continues to carry and propel it. Look up a video of how ICBM travels to get to its destination. But when it gets close, the mouth opens up, the front part, and there's warheads that come out of it. And they hitting their targets cause that fiery explosion, that impact. So it says here, by these were the third part of men killed, right? Going back to that third part. By the fire and by the smoke and by the brimstone, which issued out from their mouths. So the third part, going back to the Edomites, the reason why they're highlighted here is not because they're going to be the only casualties of war, but if you look at this war, who the majority of the key players involved in this war are Edomites, right? They're on Esau's part. The U.S., Israel, Russia, NATO, not every country in NATO, but a good portion of them, and the European Union are Edomites, right? Edomite nations. You're gonna have, the Arab countries as well, China, Moab up in there, but majority of those that are heavily involved in here, that are gonna have, these casualties, America or Babylon, it's gonna be completely melted. So the main casualties are gonna be on the side of the third part of men, which is Esau. Not to mention the destruction or the breaking down of their actual kingdom. All right. So that's why it mentions that by these were the third part of men killed. Verse 19, it says, for their power is in their mouth and in their tails. And the mouth being, once again, the warheads, because that is where the destruction is coming from. So when he's looking at this, he's seeing that the front part is where the most power, or danger is. And in their tails, for their tails were like unto serpents. And this is what he's seeing is the fire and the smoke from the latter part of the missile that's actually propelling it through the skies. It looks like a serpent that's flying in the air. That's why he said it's like we're like unto serpents. Sometimes referred to as fiery flying serpents, and had heads, and with them they do hurt. Right. Once again, it's the mouth or the warheads where the danger is. If the missile is flying, right, and it was to break off the front part, and it was to just go and try to hit you with the middle part or the latter part, that's not where the explosion is going to occur from. Okay. Verse 20 says, and the rest of the men which were not killed by these plagues, yet repented not of their works of their hands. So this is talking about those that, after, because not everybody's going to be destroyed of the war. And this is actually a precept to show you that. They call it MAD, or mutually assured destruction. Not everybody's going to be destroyed in this war, but you're going to have some that are not going to, leave off from their wicked deeds, even in the aftermath of this war. And that's why we're going to need to subject them and rule them with a rod of iron, right? To beat that correction and subjection into their minds. So it says here, yet repented not of the works of their hands, that they should not worship devils, which are idols, and idols of gold and silver and brass and stone and of wood, which neither can see nor hear nor walk. So at the time when the Lord makes his return in the midst of this war, yeah, you're going to have chaos everywhere. But even still, after all that, you're going to have people that are not going to be willing to accept the truth and not willing to bow down and follow the ways of righteousness, which will be instilled, by Yahweh, or from Yahweh through Yahushua and his men. What do you think is going to need to happen to those people? They're going to need to be subjected with force. It says, neither repented they of their murders, nor of their sorceries, nor of their fornication, nor of their thefts. And that's where that rod of iron or that rod of correction is going to come in. Okay. And that brings us to the end of the book of Revelation, the 9th chapter. Lord willing, that was edifying to the elect. In closing, I want to give all praises, honor, and glory to Yahweh, Bahasham, Yahushai, Bahasham, Racha Kodash. Until next time, Shalom.